Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
Good.
Trying to figure out how we're going to improve the world today. Fat chance, I guess. No, we have to make the effort. A little bit here, a little bit there. All of a sudden, freedom is going to break out once again.
That's right. We're close.
But we do come across a few things in the news, whether it has to do with domestic affairs or international affairs, that there's always those individuals who can't stand the idea of people having their own life, and they have to be authoritarians who tell everybody else how to live and what to do. And of course, we're opposed to that. We happen to believe very sincerely in personal liberty and not collective authoritarianism. But I want to start off with this story about the government seizing websites all over the Middle East, especially targeted Iran, seizing the websites. And why would they do such a thing? So I think this is important because, you know, there's a big fight going on in the crypto world and how people can be protected. So I think this is very serious. I wonder why they're doing this.
Yeah, it's the U.S. government, amazingly enough.
Oh,
yeah.
Imagine that. I thought it was the Iranians doing it to their people.
Or Kim Jong-un. No. It's the Biden administration.
Oh boy, I'll tell you. But that is sure a mess on there. But it is part of what's going on in the world. But it's really pretty sad that we're leading the charge on this. You know, if we had to deal with the security in the Gulf of Mexico and the Chesapeake Bay, it'd be a little bit different. But here we are over there seizing this, always in the name of national security. There's always a justification for this, and they want to make sure that everybody knows that we can take care of it and we can close them out. And we own the world. We have a big empire. It's weakening, though. The power of the empire, I think, is obviously going down. So I think this is significant leap. I don't know what justification it is for it, because most of the time authoritarianism isn't justified except from their narrow desires, you know, just to have more land or power or more weapons or win a war. So this I think is very significant, and we need to keep an eye on this one.
It's important because the U.S. seized dozens of websites, 30 some of them from Iran. And let's put up this first clip, because if you clicked on Press TV, which is the Iranian government-funded main media source, let's put up that first clip if we can. If you clicked on Press TV, this is what you would see when you went to their website. This website has been seized. The domain presstv.com has been seized by the U.S. government in accordance with a seizure warrant issued pursuant to the Office of Export Enforcement and the FBI. So, to be honest, Dr. Paul, when I first saw the story and I started thinking about it, I thought perhaps it was a hoax. I thought maybe the Iranian government seized its own websites to make the U.S. government look bad, because it's hard to believe that the U.S. government would be so ham-fisted in the way that it treats foreign media outlets and media outlets in general, because the U.S. always talks about the rules-based international order, which of course the bedrock of that is freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of the media. And if we go to that second one, and I was skeptical, I honestly for a while I thought maybe this is fake, but look at the second clip that I have, the next one. No, I went to the Justice Department's website Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021. They actually did seize this, and their justification was that the websites were disguised as news organizations, but they were targeting the U.S. with disinformation campaigns, so that therefore justifies the U.S. government taking them down off the site. And you know, you can take that down now. Yeah, I've actually been on Press TV many times. I'll probably go to the jail after I say that. But they hold a debate, and they're critical of U.S. foreign policy. Obviously, I know that it's associated with the Iranian government. We know that RT is associated with the Russian government. We know that Voice of America, which I've also been on, is associated with the American government. The point is, the idea is getting out there. And never have I been on there have I been told what to say, told what I can't say. Never did they even ask me what my opinion was about something before having me on, because it's simply a debate and it's a criticism of the U.S. Foreign policy occasionally with regard to the Iran talks and the Iran deal. But the reason I couldn't believe it's true is because it's happening at the key point in U.S. government talks with Iran. It almost makes me think, Dr. Paul, that there is a deep state out there that doesn't want these talks to go on.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, yeah.
But you know, yesterday we talked a little bit about the quote of Biden that says that anything he decides is constitutional and permissible. So if he said that, but there's always some justification, you know, for this. You know, Daniel yesterday mentioned the fact that in 1998 I stood up against the Iraq Freedom Act, which really was led to be the justification for eventually declaring war or going in and participating in a war against Iraq, which is what I complained about in 1998. But you know, even for this case, it is cited for doing this, the seizing of these websites, as the Iran Freedom Support Act of 2006. And, well, Biden was a senator there. I'm so sure he supported that. But there's always some token justification to make it look quasi-legal or quasi-moral. They got permission to do this. But, of course, our argument yesterday, and it could be applied to all these events, they have enough guidance in the Constitution where presidents don't have as much authority. But yesterday, or whenever they did this seizing of these websites, I don't remember Congress even being, well, maybe they informed their three best friends there, but they don't really inform the Congress. The people don't know about that. It might be the people say, well, you know, that doesn't make sense. Maybe they're going to do that to us. You know, and it's not like we're checking up on them because they're in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, we're over there deciding that their websites, are a threat to our national security. Anyway, it can backfire on us, and that's what I think that we have to be cautious about.
I mean, the whole thing is so Orwellian because, as you say, under the guise of the Iran Freedom Support Act, they take down news websites. So freedom equals censorship is the message that the U.S. sends. And the whole thing was done on a technicality because presstv.com and the others.com and .net, those are technically U.S. domains. So essentially they took down U.S. companies, U.S. parked websites, that's how they were able to do it. But the thing is it makes the U.S. look like the laughingstock of the world in a very sick way because if you can put up that additional one that I sent, that additional clip. This is Secretary of State Antony Blinken tweeting just a little over a month ago. On World Press Freedom Day, the United States continues to advocate for press freedom, the safety of journalists worldwide, and access to information on and offline. A free and independent press ensures the public has access to information. Knowledge is power. Secretary of State Blinken, while Julian Assange rots away, slowly dying in jail, while the U.S. government takes down websites that are critical of U.S. foreign policy. It really is. It's quite a sick joke.
You know, yesterday we complained a bit about Biden having said a few kind words, and they got along pretty well, Biden and Putin. But the first thing that Biden did when he got home was put on more sanctions on Russia. But now there's another story here today, even though they pretend for a certain group of people will say, oh yeah, they're getting along, things aren't so bad. And so also we find out that we're in the Black Sea. And that's a long way off. And here we have the British have a destroyer there, which means that they're working with the United States, having there, and they're going near Crimea, and they're dealing with the politics of that region. And like I say, that's a long long way from Florida, or United States. But anyway, there had to be some warning signs fired and bombs dropped as warning to this British destroyer. And this is off the coast of Crimea, and then this thing just gets stirred up. Totally unnecessarily. It looks like, once again, whether it's seizing websites or going to this extent, even when there's hints that we can actually talk to people, for a day and a half, and it's just so much deception that what's their true position? That Russia's about to attack us and the Iranians have to be lectured to? Or is there an opening that they're human beings and we have a lot of disagreements and we don't endorse what they do? But how can we do this with a straight face and endorse what we do?
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. That's always what bugged me the most, was we condemned correctly so much of what other countries are doing, but we were doing the same thing, and then we expected a different reaction. So, but I guess that little activity, I think, we'll be occupied with for a while to come, because it looks like that's what politics is all about: deceptions and trying to fool the people, and it gets out of hand, especially if somebody's looking for some real military conflict. But what they don't know is these incremental steps might lead to it. So what about, actually the Russians dropped some bombs in front or behind the British destroyer. Well, what if they blew up the destroyer? And you say, well, that's all Russia's fault, this sort of thing. I just think that there's so many mistakes made when they accept this idea that there is confrontation for controlling the world. And now that we have weakened ourselves overseas, which is not all necessarily bad, because that would be less militarism, then we see the gathering strength of Russia and China. So the whole thing is that we should have more diplomacy, a lot less of these threats and seizing of websites. Yeah. So if they do it, and they means generally the people who are behind the Republicans and the Democrat Party, because most of the time it occurs. I don't think, some of the complaints that we have, we don't hear too much of it on the floor of the Senate, and we don't hear too much of it in the Congress. We don't hear it in the media, so it just goes on and on, just waiting for some type of accident to happen, which would satisfy a lot of people in the military-industrial complex. They would say, that's no problem. We really wanted it to happen.
Well, the Crimea incident is important, and it's just happening earlier today over there. And the Russians have called the UK ambassador to explain what's going on. But what it looks like was playing out was this kind of trick. The US and the UK and other countries in the NATO world don't recognize that Crimea rejoined Russia. They don't recognize that, even though they held a referendum, even though they voted on it, they don't recognize it. So what it appears that the HMS Defender did was sailed into what technically are Russia's territorial waters, but we pretend that it's not Russia's place anymore, so we call it Ukraine's waters, and to test what the Russian reaction would be. And they did get their response, which is, as you say, warning shots were fired, and then they had a Sukhoi drop some bombs near them just to punctuate. We're serious about this. And interestingly enough, some people on Twitter that follow the movement of ships and military ships showed that there was a U.S. intelligence gathering ship not far from there watching the reaction. So in a sense, it might sort of in a strange way be helpful, because it does signal to the U.S. that yes, they are serious about this. And in fact, if it comes out that there was live ammunition shot, it would be the first time since the end of the Cold War, more than 30 years ago, that live ammo was shot as a deterrent. So it did send a message. The silver lining could be, okay, listen, we're serious about this, i.e. the Russians saying, we're serious about this, don't do it again or it's going to be a big trouble. But nevertheless, as you point out, what is the need for these provocations? How are they useful in any stretch of the imagination?
There will be some people that will lean in our direction, and they'll say, well, this was just a bad decision. They shouldn't have done that. But I always try to make the point that the bigger issue is, what's the overall policy? So if you're an interventionist and you're always vying for territory and angling, to have some benefits, and it's just a tactical mistake, I don't think we'll solve these problems. This come and go, and they accelerate, they get out of hand, they cost a lot of money, and all these things. But the policy eventually has to change. This is what they're not likely to do, because we've been around a long time worldwide, and we have a presence worldwide, and certainly since 1945. Financially and militarily and monetarily, and all the advantages we have, but that's shifting. That is changing, and it won't be a tactical decision. Let's say you guys, Daniel and I, we make sense. Maybe that was a mistake. We better be a little bit more cautious. That is not the answer.
Yeah.
The answer is having a different philosophy on foreign policy, one that is not designed for confrontation and aggravation and precipitating problems. It's one how can the world get along the best way? Because I'm sure there are some good people in probably all the countries, and there's some bad people who usually end up running the governments.
Yeah. Well, before the show we were talking about Venezuela, and we were looking at a map of where the oil is, and they've got so much oil, it's unbelievable. Why aren't they richer? Well, part of it's because they've got a pretty hapless economic system, and it doesn't help to have that kind of system. But the other is really U.S. sanctions. It doesn't allow them to sell any of that oil anywhere. So imagine if we had a different foreign policy where we were friendly to them, even though we don't really like Maduro that much. Maybe he's a buffoon, who knows? But if we were friendlier to them and bought tons of their oil cheap, I just filled up my car yesterday, Dr. Paul. I'm not in California where it's over $4 a gallon, but it's still pretty pricey. Imagine if we bought just that cheap oil from them and didn't lecture them about what kind of elections they should have. But I think you've got to report on the cultural Marxism front, right? You have a
sort of. Right before I go to that, it reminded me about oil and embargo, and you're not allowed to sell it. That's exactly the policy we had with Japan.
Yeah.
That finally toppled it over. And Japan was militant and far from being a republic, but nevertheless, it was oil embargo, and that was the final punishment that they would not tolerate. And this is, I think, the reason why you're seeing more military support going to Venezuela.
Yeah.
They're not changing their ways, but you see Iran has an interest, China probably has an interest, Russia has an interest. Anyway, that will resolve itself when they change their ways. Okay, a policy, domestic policy now.
Yeah.
And this little article has been Zero Hedge had it, but it had to do with this bicyclist, a transgender bicyclist. Transgender U.S. Olympic BMX rider says her goal is to burn a U.S. flag on the Olympic podium.
Okay.
Well, the one issue that is not what we're going to be talking about is are people allowed to burn the American flag, and that's a different issue.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's not what's going on here. This is, what can this individual do to demonstrate she really hates America?
Yeah.
What can they do to really cause us more splitting apart? The two people react to that. I react to, well, that is so ignorant and so mean and nasty.
Yeah.
I mean, we criticize our government. We believe that's a patriotic duty to criticize our government. We should have a right to do it. But this whole thing that she announces this, and it can't do anything other than just try to pull us apart. And but the other issue that's going on is this is transgender. It's a male that wants to ride as a girl, a woman, and I bet you would never guess when they do that and enter track meets and weightlifting. Generally speaking, but they want to compete with women. They like winning. They're very competitive. That's what this bicycle ride. I'm very competitive.
Right.
They're very competitive and they want to win. And everybody rolls over, even though maybe less than 1% endorses the principle. The 99% says, well, we have to. And they put a guilt trip on everybody.
Yeah.
If we don't go along with it, we're bigots, we're racist, and we hate people. And nobody says, well, who loves liberty?
Yeah.
You know, do the people who are the 1%ers, they go out and do this? And then the whole thing is, if they have all this done, you know, some of that surgery costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
And sometimes it has to be reversed because, you know, a large number of people are getting reversed. And for the most part, they're pointing out where the government ends up paying for a lot of that.
Yeah.
That should get people aroused, and I think that's what's happening. People are waking up to this.
Well, where are the feminists is the real question, and there are some that speak out. But if you have women, they can't win any sporting competitions anymore because it's full of men. You'd think that the feminists would come to their aid, and I think probably some of them are, and they should. But you know, on the same sort of note, Dr. Paul, I was watching some video from Loudoun County, and I think that really is ground zero right now in America for the fight against the kind of cultural Marxism, chaos type of thing. What they did is Loudoun County School Board held the last school board meeting of the school year, and what happened? They were going to talk about a new transgender policy for little kids, and they were going to talk about teaching of critical race theory, which, as we talked about yesterday, that African American with 2 medical degrees says is about tearing us apart, not putting us together. So what happened is about 200 or more parents came and signed up. We want to talk at this school board meeting against these changes. We don't like them. We disagree. So what did the school board do? They declared it an unlawful assembly and had these parents arrested, including, and he wasn't arrested, but one of the speakers was State Senator Dick Black, who we've had on this show. He's from Loudoun County. He was there, and I think he got his mic cut off. But let's watch, if we have that Twitter link, let's watch. It's only about 20 seconds of what happened of this video here.
About. All they keep doing is changing the narrative. Critical race theory is culturally responsive free.
That is of the event, but that's not the exact video of it getting shut down. I don't know if you scroll down a little bit if we can see it. But anyway, it was very active. The parents were active. They don't want their kids taught this stuff. Of course, the solution is Ron Paul curriculum, but they don't want their kids taught this stuff, and they pay for the school. And so what do? The school board has them arrested, including the man that was arrested and charged with disorderly conduct is a local business owner and a U.S. military veteran.
Yeah. You know, when this was advertised and they were announcing this, the purpose is that they were to come and be permitted when the people were allowed to make the comments on a proposed policy that would expand transgender student rights. Became unruly.
Yeah.
You know? And that my objection to this is it's used all the time. There's you know, how many genders are there? 50, 60, 80?
Yeah.
And they all have different rights?
Yeah.
This is a whole thing about this. Collective rights, group rights, it's been going on for a long, long time. They rarely will emphasize the fact that rights go to individuals.
Yeah.
And you solve your problems by voluntarism. 2 people get together and they say, I will tolerate what you're doing, you tolerate what I'm doing. But there's a rule. You can't hurt people and you can't steal from people. And you don't get the government involved, you know, giving privileges to one group over the other. So these aren't student rights. These are individual rights. These are demands.
Yeah.
These are preferences, and it's this whole idea that you can call these rights. And if people pay attention, you'd be surprised how often that's in the media. It's always somebody. I think it started with this whole notion of things like women's rights and gay rights. Boy, I'm sure people that don't understand this. This is just total blasphemy, that individual rights, but we really want to protect them, which really, and you've already made the point that, you know, feminism, that if you argue against somebody changing their sex and destroying women's sports, you're really protecting the women,
yeah.
You know, because they're individuals and they don't deserve to have unfair competition. In some ways, this is related, you know, they try to even things out by regulations on drugs. and you said, well, if you're measured and you have been taking a drug to make you enhance a drug enhancer that you can do better, most of the people are accepting this. That that's not
fair.
Not fair. But if you talk about the natural drug effect or the chemical effect, the hormonal effect of having a male, a biological male competing against a woman, that's hundreds of times more powerful than taking a drug.
Yeah.
But just think how traces of drugs have been found in some athletes, which probably they bent the rules and they deserve some punishment and all. How many times have we seen severe punishments to them? But all this business of transgenderism is perfectly all right, and they put the guilt trip on the people who won't tolerate it. If you point this out, that's why actually the reaction now is coming from women, liberal women that are on the right, saying this is unfair to the women who want to compete, and now they had to compete about males that have transgendered and think, oh, this is a fair fight, and it's a fair mess is what it is. But you know what? The people who are listening to this, who have plans for us, they say, that's exactly what we want. These jerks, they don't know what we're doing. We want chaos, and they're stirring it up. You want to make these points, but we need to stir it up with something very positive, and to me that is understanding what rights are. Rights are individual. They come to us naturally or in a God-given way, and that you solve your problems through a voluntary exchange, and you don't hurt people. And that to me is a very, very important answer that so often is totally ignored.
Yes. Well, maybe I have a future as an Olympic athlete. We wanted to do a couple of quick COVID-related things, and the first one, actually we can even put up this next clip if you have it, from Reuters. Oxford University explores anti-parasitic drug Ivermectin as COVID-19 treatment. Now, just a couple of months ago, or even literally a couple of weeks ago, if we had even put this up on the screen, we would have risked censorship and being thrown off of social media. But now it looks like over a year into this so-called COVID pandemic, they're looking at ways of actually treating people rather than completely focused on the experimental injections. So the University of Oxford said Wednesday, which is today, it's going to test ivermectin as a possible treatment. And this is because prior investigations, and this is the second paragraph, ivermectin resulted in a reduction of virus replication in laboratory studies, the university said. So it has promising results, and they're going to look more deeply into it. But I think the big question that you would ask, Dr. Paul, is why now? How many unnecessarily, if it does play out, how many people died unnecessarily because of a political decision not to look at treatments?
And there should be liability, and that's one of the principles of a free society, is liability restrains people from taking too much risk and selling a bill of goods, and yet the vaccine companies are protected against the liability, so it makes it more difficult. But when I was looking at this, I said, finally, they're looking into that. And even in the preliminary studies here, they were finding that the zithromycin might not be as good as some people thought, that was pro ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. And so I think let's hope they're on the right track and give us some good information, because it's such a shame. But once again, do you have a right to use ivermectin? Mectin? Yeah. Well, yes, you do have a right, but nobody has a right to give you something and put a name on it and said, I'm going to cure you. I can cure you from this and guarantee you're not going to do this. But the government it assumes this role of dictating the science, of it all. Well, you guys aren't following the science. Well, science varies, it changes, it requires constant study, and what we're seeing now is the backing off a little bit. But it took us over a year to get people to even consider some of these things. And your question is the important one. How many people suffered the consequence from that? They say, well, they'll take it up and they'll show 252 people died from the vaccine. and then they'll put up against 1.5, 2 million people, how many got it. It's just a small little fraction. But can you imagine what percentage that is if it happens to be your child?
Yeah.
And that you can say 100%, if somebody gets the vaccine and they die from it, 100% of those who did, if they had not gotten it, wouldn't have died.
Yeah.
It's not like just anyway, it's just all messed up. The medical system is messed up, and this has been used once again to stir up dissension and hatred and splitting people apart. And just think of how much harm they did this past year, not only medically speaking, but politically speaking, of what happened to with the lockdown.
Yeah.
And it's ongoing. There's still places wanting to. Well, it's into the vaccines for kids.
Yeah.
They have no more justification to and they are use a type of force. It's inference. Because if you don't do it, you're in big trouble, or you lose all your money and all that kind of stuff. And it looks like the kids are going to be getting these shots. A real tragedy. And 5 years from now, they say, "We sure did. We're sorry. We made this mistake. We gave everybody under 15 shots, and such a number of people died." It's really a mess.
Well, on the same topic, this is also something that you wouldn't have seen that long ago. This is the Wall Street Journal. And they have an opinion piece out yesterday actually, by two renowned doctors, Dr. Ladapo and Dr. Risch. One is at Yale and the other one is at UCLA. So they're pretty smart guys. Are COVID vaccines riskier than advertised? And the article itself, what struck me, and we talked about it earlier before we went on the show, what I think is so important about this is it's not talking about vaccines good or bad. It's actually talking about what you've talked about all along, which is the politicization of the response to this virus. And in fact, this first paragraph really sets the scene. One remarkable aspect of COVID-19 pandemic has been how often unpopular scientific ideas, from the lab leak theory to the efficacy of masks, were initially dismissed, even ridiculed, only to resurface later in mainstream thinking. Maybe they've been listening to us over the year. He goes on, differences of opinion have sometimes been rooted in disagreement over the underlying science. And here's the rub, Dr. Paul, but the more common motivation has been political. The politicization of this disease, of this virus, is key, and it's prevented, this is putting words in their mouth, but prevented lives from being saved. It's a fascinating article in the Wall Street Journal. And in fact, Dr. Paul, I have one quote from it. If we can put up that next quote from the article. This is really damning. While you would never know it from listening to public health officials, not a single published study has demonstrated that patients with a prior infection benefit from COVID-19 vaccinations. That this isn't readily acknowledged by the CDC or Anthony Fauci is an indication of how deeply entangled pandemic politics is in science. Amazing.
You'd think the science would break through and they would have a reassessment. I want to mention this group, and it's called the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System.
We've talked about that a lot. Yeah.
And this is where people can call in and get firsthand reports. I don't think it claims to be statistically proof of anything, but you do get the information of what's been going on, and it's being administered by the Center for Disease Control and the FDA, which means, there's quite a few times that you'll find some information on the very websites of the CDC, and they are saying the correction. It isn't like every single thing they put up there is wrong. There's probably some decent people there trying, but the leaders, the people like Fauci, who's on television, spreading the message. That's a different story. But there's people there that are doing this, and they've come up with that. So these are the diseases that they have been concerned with, and this is not to say that anybody who ever gets this vaccines that you're likely to have one of these. No, the numbers are still unknown. But this is how serious. When you get it, it's 100%. Yeah. That's my point. Deep vein thrombosis, very, very dangerous because you can get a blood clot in your leg, and these are the people that can have a stroke. You can get a pulmonary embolus, and it's very dangerous. The vaccine can decrease platelets, which means that you can have bleeding in the wrong body. You can have clots and bleeding. It's interesting. And more recently in the news has been the myocarditis we reported on, and that's an inflammation of the heart. Very, very serious. And I'm sure there's a lot of people have the news, when somebody dies, it gets in the news, but there's a lot of people probably have milder symptoms. Maybe they have a residual, maybe damage to heart valve or something, and they won't see anything for 10 or 15 years. Nobody knows the answer to that. And then, of course, the last one that they listed on the reports, and you can find the reports in here, people die.
That sounds pretty serious.
So, yeah, that's a tragedy. So we'll continue our very best effort to dig this stuff out here and do what we can to inform people. But I'm not going to hide my firm belief, because I believe it can't be an absolute perfect answer, but it's as good a science as we have been listening to for the past year, and that is that I have no intention of taking a vaccine, and now we have the mixture about the vaccine passport and the pseudo effort. Everybody thought, well, it'd be in here, it'll be in our body, but they've figured out how to be one step removed. Put the pressure on the businessman and the corporations that they won't hire people unless you do exactly as we tell you. In government, that's why we have a fascist type of government. I mean, we don't have real free market because we can control the social and medical activity of our corporations and our hospitals.
Yeah.
The hospitals been foolish on a lot of this, and it is because they probably get, when you add up every check that comes in that pays Medicare, Medicaid, and all these, it's probably 70% of the money that comes into some of those hospitals.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to close with a couple of quick clips, and let's go to the next one. This is kind of a laughy one. Our friend Karen Coster Campbell put this up. This is just funny because, the Delta variant is supposed to scare us to death. Here's from The Guardian. Delta variant COVID symptoms include headaches, sore throat, and runny nose. This is a real problem because it says researchers are warning that the UK's most widely established variant may be mistaken for a milder illness. I thought that was funny. And now here's the second one, which is less funny. Here is the first person who will be sentenced as the insurrectionist. This is a grandmother taken inside the Capitol. She looks like she is leading an insurrection, heavily armed, dangerous. No, wait a second. She's just wearing an American flag T-shirt and in a Trump hat and a scarf. She's going to be sentenced to prison, perhaps, for taking part in this terrible insurrection. Worst thing that's happened since the Civil War in the U.S.
What a tragedy. Yeah. And once again, division. Divide the people. Stir their emotions. Don't be logical. Just be divisive. They talk about, they're always promoting diversity. And diversity sounds like could be a pretty good word. Then I decided real diversity comes when you're truly an individual and you own your own life, and you only have to be restricted from doing harm. And it's your life to do positive things or negative things about it, and that sounds to me like the diversity that I like. That you can make up your own mind and do your own thing. And if you don't want to take certain jobs, you don't have to. Anyway, I'm for diversity, but I want to define diversity.
I'm all done, Dr. Paul.
All right, very good. I want to thank our viewers today for tuning in. I think things are improving slowly and steadily, but we still have a long way to go because once again, the variant argument is there. Daniel mentioned it. There's going to be a virus out there, and they are talking about it, and they still are talking about passports, and they're bringing about the vaccine passports indirectly. They're probably not going to be injected at this particular time, but they will have control of people, and it's the governments, even governments overseas, they're worse than the governments here. Some of our states are much better than others. So I think people are waking up. It's good to see this breakout of concern when people go as a crowd into a public meeting, and you say, well, yeah, but they can't even talk, they get thrown out. Yeah, but that's when it gets in the news, and that I think is very good, that the information is something that you can get out. And I am always convinced that there's no reason to be, despondent over this, because numbers make a difference, and that's why some of these things are getting improved, because there are more people speaking out. I think that's what finally happened to this mask thing. Some people still philosophically and medically, Fauci probably. Who knows what he believes? He's off and on, but they still want people to wear their mask and do all that nonsense that has been now proven that it didn't do any good, didn't save any lives at all. And I'm still very confident that a society based on personal liberty is probably the safest society, and it's probably the most prosperous society. It's just a shame that people are intimidated and frightened and are easily terrorized by people who build up unnecessary fear. And that's how governments operate. Scare the people. If you need a war, the enemies are coming and they're going to bomb us. Or if it's domestic, there's a virus out there and you can't see it, so you better do exactly as we tell you. So that to me, it's an educational effort. I think we're making progress, because I believe that the principles of liberty are far more excellent than the principles of authoritarianism. And if people really had a choice, they would opt out for liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.